Welcome to the Cross Counsel Podcast, where we believe that negative emotions should not run your life. Join Mary Carlton and Steve Freitag as they share the keys they've learned from over 20 years of helping people find genuine freedom and live a more meaningful life through the truth, love, and healing of Jesus. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Cross Counsel Podcast. I, of course, am your host, John Crevillian, and I'm joined with my co-hosts, Mary Carlton. How are you, Mary?
Hey, I'm great. Thank you.
Awesome. And Steve Freitag, how are you, sir?
It's going to be a chatty day, Mary.
I know. Exactly. Need more coffee.
I can't tell now if it's the heat that's kicking on or the F-35s are going over my head, but yeah. Hopefully we're good here on this side of Madison. You know, listening to the sound of freedom is usually nice, I guess, if you have the right perspective. But
Sure.
it always seems like something comes up. Yeah. What's that, John?
I was going to say, well, yeah, like when it's like Tuesday morning in Madison, you're like, ooh, what's happening here?
They do drills all the time.
Gotcha. Pretty sure if we heard a jet like that flying overhead over here, we'd be like, someone stole that. That's just lacrosse for you. Anyway, how are you guys? What's new? How's life?
It's good. Yeah, I know we're ahead of you on weather being down south here, but we're about to start planting season. So we're done with Christmas and all the wonderfulness of that. But now we're planting seeds and things for starting up our new farm season. So it's about to get super busy.
That's nice.
Yeah,
wow, that's
it's so
wild.
fun. We get to plan everything in the spring, what we're going to do, and try to not make the same mistakes we made last year.
Sure.
Yeah, it's fun.
Figure out what new like Italian sounding names to give your chickens, that sort of thing. Because wasn't it Pablo?
Yeah, Pablo. He's been gone for a while. Now we have Sky.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough.
Yeah.
It's not like Giovanni or nothing like that.
No. My granddaughter actually named the two new ones we got Sky and Blue because they're kind of a lavender color. So yeah, we didn't get to name those. Mm-hmm.
Fair enough. My neighbors haven't gotten. Go ahead.
I was just saying, I don't have any chicken stories for you at this point.
Yeah, I haven't had any for a while. My neighbors had some for a bit, but not anymore.
Thank God. We can move on to something more interesting.
True. But first, we're going to get a quick word from Jenny.
Paul prays in Ephesians 3 that we would be rooted and established in love. Love that surpasses knowledge so that we may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. At Cross Counsel, it's miraculous to watch people transform by the love and truth of Jesus. But some people need a little extra help. We never turn anyone away because of their inability to cover their session fees. Would you be willing to cover that cost for somebody who is looking for freedom from something in their life? We are inviting you to be a part of what Cross Counsel is doing here. Would you be willing to donate to cover someone? Bless them, though you've never met them. You can do that today at crosscounsel.com.
All right, guys, let's go ahead and get started with the subject of the day. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about imposter syndrome, or the fear of being found out, which, is kind of a general, ambiguous thing, or, well, it can be applied to a lot of different places, I think. People can be afraid of being found out in a lot of different ways. I know that's something that's definitely millennials have felt that. Like, if anyone's generation has, it's specifically mine, has dealt with a lot of imposter syndrome. But yeah, I don't know where your guys' generations, like how often that's come up over there, or for the Zoomers, I really don't know where they're at. But I can definitely speak to this being very familiar and very much a problem with my generation. But I'm curious, though, what have you guys dealt with as far as like clients are concerned, as far as people walking through Cross Counsel's doors? Have you seen a lot of that?
Well, we could back. Yeah, you're probably going the same place I am, Steve. Go ahead.
No, I'm interested. I'm really interested now to see if you were right about what I was
Whoa.
thinking, because by now I just forgot it.
Do great minds think alike? Stay tuned.
I was going to say it's been around since Adam and Eve, right? The fear of
For
being
sure.
found
Oh, yeah.
out, right?
Mhm.
Hiding when you've done something that you know you shouldn't have done. And I think every person on the planet has some level of that still, right? Some level of performing because they're scared that if they be who they really are or confess what they're really doing, it's not going to go well for them. So that's the way that I see it. Is that what you were going to say, Steve?
Almost verbatim.
That's
Other than,
what I
other than
thought.
not at all, but yeah. I actually thought I thought to back up a step, just thinking about generations. And Mary, I don't know about you, but I don't remember hearing about all the different syndromes. How many syndromes are there now? If you were to do a Google search on how many syndromes are there?
I don't know. Lots.
Quite some.
So your point, Mary, actually dovetails into what I was going to say. It seems like we're almost overly obsessed, and people have to justify the grants they're getting in a master's program to come up with all these different names or ways to market whatever the issue is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it is sort of essential to go back to those two in the garden and where that started, the shame,
Mm-hmm.
the distortions that people believe. So I don't have a problem in a sense of labeling something, and because that gives you maybe a box to work from, but I think people get stuck in boxes. And not to jump ship from imposter syndrome, but I've been thinking about the podcast that we did on narcissism and some of the conversations that I've had, and I think there's just even this temptation for people to, like, I mean, just picture this: them going to their phone or them going to their tablet or whatever device they're using and going, "Is my dad a narcissist? Is my mom a narcissist? Is my spouse a narcissist?" I'm like, well, that looks pretty narcissistic to me, right?
Mm.
Yeah. So I don't even like labeling people
Mm-hmm.
with those kind of things. What I've told people actually is, okay, this person is a child of God. If they're following Jesus, you can, this is somebody that they're trying to maybe order their life a little bit. And one of their challenges is dealing with narcissism. So I just think that's a better way to
Mm-hmm.
approach those kind of labels. Now, imposter syndrome doesn't, that at least doesn't speak to somebody's identity as
Mm-hmm.
much. So maybe syndrome isn't the worst thing in the world to investigate for yourself. So speaking of Google, right? I'm like, okay, what does Google say imposter syndrome is, just so people know what we're talking about according to Google. So imposter syndrome is the condition of feeling anxious and not experiencing success internally, despite being high performing in external and objective ways. This condition often results in people feeling like a fraud or a phony and doubting their abilities. So just so we have a starting point with that, not that that is the be all end all definition of what imposter syndrome is, but yeah.
Yeah, I think we all do
or they
that
don't think they are.
sometimes.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, anytime we act a certain way to hide feelings that are inside that don't match, it's a bit of that happening. I think you're right that we tend to categorize people more and more and more than we ever did. As a kid, I don't remember very few labels that were put on people. And those were ones that were generally medically, like autism, things like that were medically defined. But now it's like there's hundreds of labels, for people and your personalities and the Enneagram and all the things that, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of all that. It can help you understand
Well, it's
yourself, but then let's move on to what's happening in my life that needs to change.
Right. And I think that if we look at it and, yeah, we don't define ourselves by these labels, but we look at these labels as a way to diagnose a problem and then look towards a solution. I think that's the right way to use them. you know?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Right. Because those are moving targets, those tests that people take.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, yeah, I
Depending
wouldn't
on
trust the
what
tests.
day it is.
Yeah.
Right. No, I'm just saying people then make it a concrete thing at times. Not everybody, but some people make it, well, I am a this, I am a that. I'm like, oh man, I don't want to narrow myself down to that. So anyway, getting back to the idea of being found out,
Yes.
it was eye-opening. I'm pretty sure that it was in the book Wild at Heart by John Eldridge, where he talks about men. Their big issue is, do I have what it takes?
Mm-hmm.
And so he goes into a little bit of detail with that, and part of that is, just the guy at his desk just waiting for somebody to tap him on the shoulder and say, excuse me, you don't belong here.
Mm.
So I think that actually did capture the imagination of a lot of men. Like, oh, maybe I do struggle with just even that idea. Maybe imposter syndrome is a little bit too narrow, but that idea that somebody is just going to say, excuse me, it's time for you to move on, which then we can talk about the lie-based thinking stuff, because from just the little research that I did and the videos that I watched, when it comes back to imposter syndrome, it's usually people who are more successful, which makes sense for that specific thing, because you probably don't have somebody who's digging ditches who's like, oh, someday someone's going to say, oh, you shouldn't have achieved so much, because I think if you're digging ditches, maybe that's the most wonderful thing that you could think you could be doing, because there's value and dignity in that. So, but it still comes back down to our insecurities. And so when I think about somebody, tapping me on the shoulder saying, you don't belong here, boy, Mary, we could speak to that.
Yeah. I
Anything
mean,
you want to jump in there?
what if someone did that? What would that feel like? What would that expose? And that's kind of a litmus test. I think you can just ask yourself that question or put yourself in that scenario. What would that feel like, right? What would be exposed in that moment? And that's really what we want to help people with, is what's going on underneath that, so that they can have confidence and peace in their life, versus this fear that somebody's going to figure out that I'm not really good at this, or someone's going to find out that, I messed up, or whatever that fear is that's going on there. So that's what we do, right? That's what we help people do, is find out where those feelings are coming from, so they can get free of those, so that doesn't, because that cycle, that's a painful cycle to be in. I can totally remember growing up with that for most of my life, just fear constantly, fear that I don't belong, and they all know it, and they're going to realize, someone's going to say that to me, you shouldn't be here. Just the fear that I'm not going to measure up. It's not just a man thing, but I think it probably gets exposed more because of the roles that they play in society, although that's changing a lot too, right? But getting free of that fear and that guilt that's being carried all the time, when you're in that kind of a mindset, is just so wonderful, to live in the peace and not have to constantly be vigilant that you're going to mess up, or that people are going to find out who you really are, that you're not good enough, that you don't have what it takes. That's a lot to live with, and I love it when we help people get free of those things.
I think when it comes to even that phrase, I don't belong, along with the fear and the possible shame that comes with that, I think a huge part of that for some people could be abandonment. This sense I don't belong here, and if I don't belong here, I'm going to be isolated, and that's what we fear the most. So there can be so much wrapped up in I don't belong, when there's a belief that I'm unacceptable, even though you know that Christ has accepted you, that you have this freedom from your sin, that you have been grafted in, that you're adopted as a son or a daughter of God. There can still be this deep sense of I'm unacceptable, I'm not good enough. as much as some people can feel of I'm worthless, I'm unimportant. So those things can all also play into this I don't belong. And sometimes I look up different strategies for people to kind of cope with some of that stuff. And as much as I think that negative self-talk is bad, I don't think we should be treating ourselves poorly in our head. And to whatever extent positive self-talk can kind of just help you hobble along a little bit better, what we're actually looking for is not just functionality. What we're looking for is freedom, and freedom that
Yeah.
only the Lord can provide by aligning our hearts with His. So
Yeah. I mean, it's an awful cycle to be in, Steve, to feel all those emotions and to have all those lies underneath there. And even if you recognize the lies, to tell yourself the truth and to hope that that will make it go away. That's a lot of work, I can say from experience. It it it, it was so much work for me just to keep a persona in place, in my work life primarily, I think is where it showed up. Um, so yeah, I read all the big self-help books back then. In fact, I don't think I was a believer even back then. But even when I was a believer, I read all the books that Christian people wrote on how to self-talk yourself into freedom. And, and I did do it, and it can help in the moment, and it can, what you focus on is what's going to give you strength. So if you focus on those positive things and what the Lord has done, you're going to feel his strength. But if deep down you believe something opposite, then you have to continually remind yourself of that truth over and over and over every day and every time that gets triggered. And it's a lot of work, and it doesn't remove the shame of what happens when those lies are triggered. You're still going to have to go through that. And that's the part that I hated, was something would happen and then, oh, this horrible feeling of shame and worthlessness because I hadn't dealt with the lies underneath there. I couldn't perform myself out of those emotions happening. I could talk myself out of them once they happened, but when those lies got triggered, I felt them. And so that never went away until the Lord brought his perspective at the root of those things. And that was such a relief. And it, I had many things that were like that, where I had to have the Lord's perspective to be able to fully be free. So that's what we're looking for, is to bring relief to people of all those shameful feelings that we feel for whatever reason, that cause us to draw away from life because we're afraid that we're going to be found out for who we really are, and deep down we think we're not enough, or whatever it is that that person's dealing with that makes them want to pretend to be something they're not. Those feelings are just so hard to live with on a day-to-day basis, and we want that struggle to be over for people, and it can be, it totally is, for people who are willing to see where those feelings and those lies got planted and invite the Lord in for his perspective.
your thoughts there also triggered a thought about we want, what was the phrase that you used? We don't want them to struggle with that. Is that what you were saying?
Yes,
Is that
we
how you
don't
said
want
it?
people
So
to.
yeah, because then what do? We try to overcompensate. And so there are some
Mhm,
people who probably don't have that thought of I don't belong. Some people have the thought, well, I should have that guy's job. I should be paid more.
mhm,
I should be
mhm,
um, elevated up the chain. And that can be driven by some of the same lies that people believe about themselves. And it's a way of overcompensating. And so their way of
mhm,
managing the struggle isn't being a quote unquote victim of it. It's almost
mhm,
to be an oppressor in that sense,
mhm,
because it's still trying to cover those things up. And what I was also thinking was, it's, I don't think our work here on earth is supposed to be without struggle, but I think the more unnecessary struggles that
mhm,
we are dealing with, because there is the struggle of um, what happens just on a daily basis in a broken world. I think
Mm-hmm.
to square your shoulders and stand up straight, and to take a look at, okay, what are the challenges that God has put in front of me, or that are just simply in
Mm-hmm.
front of me? How can I um, seek to bring some sort of good out of a broken world, as God helps me be aware of those things that need to be attended to in my life, in my world, in my reach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's get the stuff out of the way that's lie-based thinking that's causing
Mm-hmm.
unnecessary pain and struggle in our life, so we can focus our energies on truly winning souls for the kingdom and building God's kingdom here on earth and all the things that He's called us to do. But I just know for myself, I I spent way more energy managing myself than I than I ever spent helping others, back in the day before the Lord started to work on some things. And I think that's true of a lot of people. The question that I ask people is, whether they're overcompensating or whether they're shrinking back and being a victim in their life, do they feel peace? And are there areas where they don't feel peace? Because I was an overachiever kind of a person that hid all the stuff underneath. Most people would not have known what I just confessed about feeling worthless and all that. They would not have known that. They would not have seen that because I worked so hard to achieve. But peace was the last thing I felt. I rarely felt peace in my life until the Lord started to intervene. And so, yeah, whatever it is we're doing, we know we want to do it out of a sense of peace and connection with the Lord, and not self managing or self promoting or self protecting. That all of that is what is so much work. It's a struggle that we don't need to be fighting.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And to maybe put an even finer point to it, if you are struggling with some sort of sense of who's the next person, or is there somebody that's going to tap me on the shoulder and say you don't belong here, instead of just telling yourself, oh, I do belong here, and telling yourself some truths, we invite you to allow
mm-hmm,
yourself to feel what that feels like, and to identify
mm-hmm,
what's really going on there, and just asking the Lord to help you connect to some places where maybe you bought into that before, because that's what we
mm-hmm,
would do if somebody came in for a session. And it's usually easier to have somebody else in the room with you. That is our job. But just to
mm-hmm,
start thinking about, maybe I've felt the same way. I haven't had this job. I haven't been in this position, but maybe this stuff traces back to things that I've carried for a long time. And to lean into the Lord about that. I think He just loves when we press into those things, and to seek Him and see what He has for
mm-hmm.
us.
Yeah. I read a quote by C.S. Lewis the other day,
Ooh.
and I really it really spoke to me. And he said, "Fallen man is not simply an imperfect creature who needs improvement. He's a rebel who must lay down his arms."
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that's really more truthful because we have these strategies that we use where we lean on our own understanding, and the arm of strength is our arm of strength. And when we're in that place where we won't lean on the Lord and trust Him, um, His strength is actually prevented from being evidenced in our life to the degree that He would like it to be, because it's like we have our own system already figured out, and this is
Mm-hmm.
how we're going to do it. And so, the Christian walk is, God, I'm laying down all of my weapons, all of my abilities, even all of my things that I've relied on outside of you. And I'm opening the door to you, bringing your provision, your answer, your strength in. And it is a process. of laying ourselves down to do that. But so worth it. His stuff is so much better than ours.
Right?
In every way.
No podcast is truly complete without a C.S. Lewis quote.
True. This has been the Cross Council Podcast. Please remember to subscribe, rate, share with your friends, and look for us on social media. The world will become a much better place, and Jesus will be seen in a much better light the more we are transformed by his truth and love. We'll see you next time, everybody.